Most people have it completely backwards. They spend their whole lives trying to make more money when they should be spending their lives trying to need less of someone else's. Let me explain what I mean, because that's not the same thing. And most people confuse those two concepts their entire working lives. I grew up in Pittsburgh. My dad upholstered cars. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. Money was always this thing that existed just slightly out of reach, and the adults around me treated like a force of nature, like weather. Something that happened to you, not something you controlled. You got a job, you kept the job, you hoped the job kept you. That was the plan, that was the whole plan. And I watched those adults work incredibly hard. I mean, genuinely, backbreakingly hard. And most of them ended up okay, not free, okay? There's a massive difference between okay and free. And for a long time, I couldn't articulate exactly what that difference was. I just knew I could feel it. The difference between waking up because you want to versus waking up because you have to. I wanted the first one so bad, it almost made me physically ill. So I started selling garbage bags door to door when I was 12. Not because some adult told me to, because I figured out that the only way to stop needing someone else's permission to have money was to go get some yourself. That sounds simple. It is simple, but simple is not the same as easy, and nobody tells you that enough. Here's what I eventually learned, and this is the foundation of everything I'm going to tell you today. Your job is not your wealth. Your job is just a bridge. It's a bridge that gets you from where you are to where you're at, building something that doesn't need you standing on it every single day. The problem is most people fall in love with the bridge and they never build the thing on the other side. I want to talk to you today about 3 specific things you need to buy if you actually want to stop being owned by a schedule somebody else made for you. Not 3 vague concepts, not motivational poster garbage. 3 real, specific, actionable things. And I'm going to tell you exactly why each one works and what it actually looks like when you get it right and when you get it wrong, because I've done both. The first thing you need to buy is equity. And I don't mean that in some fancy Wall Street way. I mean ownership, a piece of something, skin in the game of something that makes money whether you show up or not. Here's the brutal truth about employment that took me longer than I'd like to admit to fully absorb. When you're an employee, you are a cost. That's it. I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm saying it because understanding it changes how you operate. Your employer looks at you and sees a line item. Your salary, your benefits, your desk, your computer, your slice of the electric bill, all of it is a cost they manage. The goal of a business is to generate profit, and profit is what's left after costs, which means by definition, as an employee, you are never getting the full value of what you produce. You can't be, if they paid you the full value of what you produced, they'd have no profit and no reason to have a business. Now again, this is not sinister. This is just how the math works. But once you see that math clearly, you realize the only way to be on the right side of it is to own something. When I was in my early 20s, I was bartending and doing whatever I could to keep the lights on while I tried to figure out my next move. I had basically nothing in terms of savings, but I started reading everything I could about business and technology because this was the early computer era and I could see that something was changing. And I made a decision that I would put whatever small amount I could, and I mean genuinely embarrassingly small amounts, into companies I believed in through index funds because I couldn't afford individual stock research and didn't have the time for it. And here's what happened. Nothing, for a long time, nothing visible happened. That's the thing about owning equity that people don't tell you in the beginning. It feels completely pointless. The amounts are small, the returns feel microscopic, and your friends who are spending that money on a nicer apartment or a better car seem like they're living better lives than you. They're not. They're just living louder lives. The magic of owning equity is not what happens in year 1 or even year 5. It's what happens in year 15. When you look at the account and the number is something you couldn't have rationally. Predicted from your starting point, compounding is not a theory. It is one of the only genuine mathematical advantages available to ordinary people. And most ordinary people voluntarily refuse to use it because it requires patience. And patience is hard to sell. But here's what I want you to understand about equity, specifically in the context of freedom from work. The goal isn't to get rich. At least not initially. The goal is to build a floor, a monthly income from ownership that slowly rises towards your monthly expenses. The day your ownership income crosses your expense line is the day work becomes optional. It might take 10 years, it might take 20, but compare that to the alternative, which is never, and suddenly 20 years doesn't sound so bad. The mistake most people make with equity is they treat the stock market like a casino. They pick hot stocks based on what their brother-in-law heard at a barbecue. They panic sell when the market drops 20%. They buy high because the FOMO is overwhelming and sell low because the fear is even more overwhelming. They are trading based on emotion and they are getting destroyed for it. I've made mistakes in the market too. Early on, I made some moves that were driven by excitement rather than logic, and I paid for it. The lesson I took from those mistakes is this: when you're starting out, boring is better. A diversified index fund is boring. It's not a cocktail party conversation. Nobody's impressed that you own a slice of the entire economy. But you know what? A slice of the entire economy has returned an average of around 10% annually over the long run. That's not a bad deal for doing almost nothing. Own equity. Start today, not tomorrow. Today, even if it's $20. Not because $20 is going to change your life this month, but because the habit of acquiring ownership is the foundation of everything else I'm about to tell you. The second thing you need to buy is a system. And this is where I've made my real money. So pay close attention. A system is anything that generates income that isn't directly tied to your personal hours. A business that runs without you being the bottleneck: software, content, a product. A service that scales without scaling your workload proportionally. The key word is scalable. Can it grow without you growing proportionally with it? When I started Micro Solutions, my first real company, I was selling computer consulting and software. And for a while, I was with the company. And I did the sales. I did the installations. I handled the support calls. If I got sick, the company got sick. If I took a week off, the company took a week off. That is not a system. That is a job with extra steps and extra stress. The shift happened when I started asking a different question. Instead of asking, how do I get more clients? I started asking, how do I build something that serves clients without needing me in every interaction? That question changes everything, because suddenly you're not thinking about your capacity, you're thinking about your architecture. We built processes, we built training, we built products that could be sold repeatedly without a custom installation each time. And when we sold Micro Solutions to CompuServe in 1990 for $6 million, that wasn't just a transaction. That was a proof of concept. I needed to understand that systems properly built create value that is completely disproportionate to the labor you put in. The buyer wasn't buying my hours, they were buying the machine. The machine that ran without me having to be in every room. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that sounds great for someone who already had a tech company, but what about me sitting here, not in tech, and maybe not even sure what kind of system to build? Fair question. Let me give you the framework I use. Look at your life right now. Look at what you know, what you're good at, and what problems you run into repeatedly that other people are probably running into too. Because a system doesn't have to be a tech company. It can be anything that provides repeatable value. A small e-commerce business, a content platform, a service business that you eventually hire people to run. A piece of software, educational material, the specific vehicle matters less than the underlying structure. Can it make money without you being present for every dollar it makes? The biggest misconception about building a system is that it's passive. It's not passive, not in the beginning. Building a real income-generating system is some of the hardest work you'll ever do, precisely because there's no guaranteed paycheck at the end of it. You're building on faith in your own judgment, and most people don't have enough confidence in their judgment to sustain that kind of uncertainty for months or years. I had a deal fall apart once that I'd been working on for the better part of a year, a full year. And I'd put real money and enormous time into it, and it completely collapsed in the final stages because of a circumstance I couldn't control. And the temptation in that moment is to go back to safe, go back to the thing that pays you every 2 weeks without drama. I understand that temptation. It's powerful, But that temptation is your future self begging you to stay trapped. Here's the thing about building systems that I wish someone had told me earlier. Your first one probably won't work. Maybe your second won't either. The system you eventually build that changes your financial life might be your third or fourth serious attempt. This is not discouraging if you understand it correctly. Every failed attempt teaches you something that makes the next one sharper. But people who expect their first attempt at a system to be the one that frees them, those people quit after the first failure and go back to selling their hours. The way I think about it is this. Every time you build something and it doesn't work, you've paid tuition. Expensive tuition sometimes, but you've bought knowledge about what doesn't work in your specific domain, which is actually valuable. The most expensive mistakes I've made in business have also been my most educational. I try very hard to make sure I only have to pay that tuition once per lesson. Start with a small system, not your magnum opus, not the billion-dollar idea. Build something small that could generate $100 a month without your direct involvement. Then 500, then 2,000. Get comfortable with the concept before you try to scale it. The goal is to prove the model. Once you know the model works, scaling is just a matter of resources and time. And here's the connection between equity and systems that most people miss. The cash flow from your system, the income that comes in while you're sleeping or at your kid's soccer game or whatever, that cash flow can be invested into equity, which means your system is accelerating your ownership, and your ownership, as it grows, begins generating its own cash flow, which can be reinvested back into your system or into more equity. These two things feed each other. That's the engine. That's how you build something that genuinely compounds. But both of those things, the equity and the system, are dramatically accelerated by the third thing. And this one surprises people because it doesn't feel like a financial investment. But I'm convinced it is the highest returning investment available to most people. And the third thing you need to buy is knowledge. Specific, deep, ruthlessly applied knowledge. I want to be clear about what I mean, because when people hear this, they immediately think of college degrees or MBA programs or certifications. That's not what I'm talking about. I went to Indiana University. I learned useful things there, but the knowledge that actually made me money wasn't in a classroom. It was in the 2,000 hours I spent reading about the software industry before most people knew what the software industry was. There is a moment in every comparative domain when information is unevenly distributed. Some people know something that most people don't yet know in that window. The people who understand the situation clearly can make decisions that look brilliant to everyone else later, but weren't actually brilliant at the time. They were just well informed. They'd done the work of knowing their domain deeply when others hadn't bothered yet. I was obsessed with technology and business in the early 80s in a way that most people around me thought was weird. I was reading trade publications cover to cover. I was talking to people in the industry constantly. I was trying to understand not just how things worked, but why they worked and what that implied about where things were going. And that obsession, that specific deep knowledge, let me see opportunities that people with broader but shallower knowledge couldn't see. This isn't unique to tech. It applies to any domain. Real estate, healthcare, manufacturing, finance, sports, whatever. There's always someone who knows their domain deeply enough to see things others can't. And that person has leverage that no salary negotiation can replicate. But here's the specific application of knowledge that I think is most undervalued for people trying to buy their freedom from work. You need to know the domain you're going to build your system in so well that you can identify the unmet needs that you and only you are positioned to address. Because if your system is built on generic knowledge, anyone can build it. And if anyone can build it, the market will commoditize it fast and you'll be competing on price, which is a race to the bottom. But if your system is built on knowledge that took you years to accumulate, it is inherently harder to copy. And harder to copy means better margins. Better margins mean faster freedom. I'll give you a real example. When I started broadcast.com with my partner Todd Wagner, the reason it worked wasn't just that we saw streaming before other people. It was that I'd spent years understanding both the technology infrastructure required for streaming and the business of content distribution. Both. Most tech people understood the technology, but not the content business. Most content people understood their business, but not the technology. The intersection of those two knowledge sets, which took years to develop, was where the opportunity lived, and Yahoo bought us for $5.7 billion in 1999, not because we were lucky, because we saw something clearly that the intersection of our specific knowledge made visible. Now, I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you that because the structure of that opportunity is the same structure of every meaningful opportunity in every domain. It lives at the intersection of things most people know and things almost nobody knows. And the only way to get to that intersection is to go deep. Here's the practical side of this, because I know some of you are sitting there thinking, this is inspiring, but you don't know where to start. Pick one thing, one domain that is at the intersection of what you actually care about and what the market actually needs. Don't try to be knowledgeable about everything. That's just being average about a lot of things. Pick your domain and go embarrassingly deep. Read everything. Talk to everyone in it you can access. Fail inside it early and often. Build a reputation as someone who knows this specific thing at an unusually deep level. And here's the thing about knowledge that distinguishes it from every other asset I'm going to describe. It compounds in a way that's almost magical, because knowledge doesn't just help you make better decisions in a straight line, it helps you recognize patterns. And pattern recognition is the real superpower in business. When you've been deep in a domain long enough, you start to see situations that remind you of other situations you've already navigated. And instead of figuring it out from scratch, you can draw on the accumulated pattern library in your head. That's experience. That's judgment. That's the stuff that you literally cannot buy with money. You can only buy it with time and attention. But there's a piece of the knowledge investment that I want to specifically call out because I think it's the most actionable and the most underdone by people who genuinely want to build something. You need to invest in understanding how money actually works. Not investing necessarily, though that matters. I mean, the mechanics of business finance, how cash flow works, how margins work, how equity dilution works, how debt can be either a tool or a trap, depending on how you use it, the difference between revenue and profit, the difference between growth and sustainable growth. I talk to entrepreneurs constantly through Shark Tank and through my own investing, and the single most common knowledge gap I see is people who have a great product or a great idea, but genuinely don't understand the financial mechanics of their own business. They don't know their unit economics. They don't know when they'll be cash flow positive. They can't explain their cap table. And this ignorance is catastrophically expensive because it means they make decisions based on intuition rather than math. And when the math doesn't work, intuition can't save you. You don't need an accounting degree. You need to understand maybe 15 financial concepts deeply enough that you can apply them to your specific situation. That's it. 15 concepts that most people could learn in a dedicated month of reading, and those 15 concepts will save you from the most common and most fatal business mistakes. Now, let me bring all three of these together because they work as a system themselves, and the way they interact is the most important thing I can leave you with. Equity is your floor. It's slow, it's steady, it's boring in the best possible way, and it builds underneath you while you sleep. Every month, you put money into ownership of productive businesses. You are building the foundation of a financial life that doesn't depend on your continued labor. The timeline is long, but the math is relentless, and it works in your favor if you stay consistent. A system is your engine. It's how you create income that scales beyond your personal capacity. It's hard to build. It requires tolerating uncertainty and repeated failure. But when you get it right, a good system generates income with a leverage ratio that no salary can match, and the cash flow from your system feeds your equity, which accelerates your floor, which reduces the pressure on your system, which gives you the freedom to build the system better. It's a virtuous cycle once it starts spinning. Knowledge is the fuel and the multiplier. Without deep, specific knowledge, your equity decisions will be mediocre at best. Without deep specific knowledge, your system will compete in the most crowded part of any market instead of finding the unique position that makes it defensible. Deep knowledge is what converts effort into leverage. It's what allows you to work smart in a way that's not just a cliche, but an actual mathematical advantage. The most common mistake I see when people hear a framework like this is they try to do all three simultaneously and at full intensity from day one, and they burn out in 6 months and go back to whatever they were doing before. Don't do that. Sequence it. Start with the equity habit first because it requires the least time and can begin with the smallest amounts, $10 a week if that's what you have. The habit matters more than the amount at this stage. Once the habit is locked in and automatic, layer in the knowledge investment. Start reading deeply in the domain where you want to build your system. Give yourself permission to just absorb for a while. You don't have to build anything yet. Just learn. Once your knowledge in that domain gets to the point where you start seeing specific unmet needs, specific problems that aren't being solved, well, start sketching the outline of a system that could address one of those needs, then build a small version of it, test it, learn from it, iterate, and this whole cycle can run in parallel with a full-time job. I know that because I did it in the early days of Micro Solutions. I was still doing other work to pay rent while I was building the company on the side. It's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. But exhaustion in service of building your own freedom is a completely different experience than exhaustion in service of building someone else's dream. I want to address the people watching this who are thinking they don't have the resources to do any of this, because I grew up without resources. I know what that feels like. And I want to give you the version of this that applies to your situation specifically. If money is genuinely tight, the equity habit starts at whatever amount doesn't break you financially, not what the internet tells you is the right amount. Whatever you can genuinely put aside without creating a crisis for yourself. If that's $5, that's $5. What matters is the decision that ownership is a priority, not the size of the initial investment. If time is tight, the knowledge investment doesn't require a lot of money. It requires the time you currently spend not building your future. I'm not going to pretend that's not a real sacrifice. It is watching less TV, spending less time on social media, protecting a few hours a week as dedicated learning time. Those are genuinely hard changes to make when life is already demanding. But they are changes measured in hours, not in dollars. And the return on those hours, properly invested in deep domain knowledge, is the best investment available to someone without capital. The system, when you get there, can start as a side project, something you're building in your spare time, not instead of your income, but alongside it. The goal is not to quit your job next month. The goal is to build something that makes quitting your job eventually a rational choice rather than a desperate leap. Freedom from work doesn't mean freedom from effort. I want to be really clear about that. I work as hard now as I ever have, but the nature of the work is completely different when it's work you've chosen rather than work you need in order to survive. When you're building something you own, when you're solving problems you care about, when the returns flow back to you rather than to an employer, work feels different. It has a different weight. You might put in more hours, but you're not exhausted in the same way because you're running towards something instead of running in place. The two rivers I keep coming back to in my head, the one that moves and the one that's dammed. The difference isn't how hard the water is working. Water in a dam works very hard pushing against the walls. The difference is direction. The water in a river is going somewhere. The water in a dam is just maintaining pressure. Your energy is going somewhere right now. Every hour you work, every dollar you earn, every bit of knowledge you absorb, it's all going somewhere. The question is whether it's going somewhere that builds toward your freedom or whether it's going toward keeping someone else's system running. Buy equity. Start today, regardless of the amount. Build a system, even slowly, even painfully, even through multiple failures, and go so deep into your chosen domain that you become one of the people who actually sees clearly what most people can only guess at. That's the path. It's not complicated. It is absolutely hard. But hard is not the same as impossible. And possible, if you're willing to be patient enough, is all you ever actually need. Stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for the right moment or enough money or a better situation. The only condition that actually matters is the decision to start. Make it right now, today, and then make it again tomorrow. That's the whole thing. That's the secret. That isn't really a secret at all. Start and continue. Everything else takes care of itself.